Every day, there are stories about college graduates who have multiple degrees and can't find a job. Every day, there are posts on LinkedIn and, articles in all of the business journals talking about layoffs, mass layoffs in tech. So I think that all of this stuff is definitely having an impact on the way that Gen Z thinks about the future. As they think about that, I think there's this push to understand what is a stable path, even if it's only for the next 20 years, and then being able to pivot from there.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenly, and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today we've got a great trending topics episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days we cover things like trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Some days we open up for Q&A, and other days we have Matt on for a mic drop episode where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. All right, today's trending topic. Trades are getting a boost from Gen Z. A recent Wall Street article journal was titled How Gen Z is Becoming the Tool Belt Generation. So this isn't going to be another conversation about generational divides, but this is actually a much larger conversation that I think recruiters absolutely need to be aware of, and especially keeping a pulse on as you think about the entire market or the industries or the jobs that you focus on currently and how you may or may not want to start thinking about what that means for you over the next few years or decades as this generation really starts to enter the workforce in growing numbers. So with that, we've got our trending topics queen, Lex. Welcome back.
Happy to be here, and I am stoked to talk about this. I think it is a fascinating topic and one that has definitely picked up steam in the past year or so, but this is a conversation that's been being had for much longer. Actually, my first job right out of college, ironically, was working at an education foundation supporting the school district. One of the biggest programs that we had was a pipeline program for both construction and medical trades in general. And the idea behind this was okay, college is super expensive. Realistically, especially in low income communities, not every student is going to be able to go to college, and not every student should. So there was this push for even starting as young as middle school, exposing kids to different career tracks that could be interesting to them and then also could be very profitable right out of school. You go through this apprenticeship program immediately upon, graduating from high school, and then you walk into a job 6 months later with no debt and are ready to just start making money. So this is something that, even 10 years ago when I graduated from college, the conversation around this was already happening in certain sectors. But I think that this is something that has now become a little bit more urgent as we're starting to see, one, the conversation around whether or not college is worth it become much more prevalent. And we're also starting to see a major need for more skilled workers in the trades. Construction specifically is one of the big ones where we're really feeling this. There's a lot of demand and not a lot of people who are trained and ready to step into these roles. So this is a really interesting topic, one that I think, again, there's a lot of context for, but is starting to become a little bit more pressing as time goes on. And so I'm excited to get into all of this and kind of turn over a few things and then talk through what this looks like for recruiters in the future. What are the opportunities here? And what are some of the challenges as well? So I'm excited.
Perfect. And I'm sure you've got a good structure before I just go into like why, how, what's this mean, Lex?
Yes.
That you have a story. Ooh, as I fling my pen everywhere. That you probably have a good story arc for like how we want to kind of set this conversation up before we get into what it means for recruiters and everything. So let's see what you've got.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Context is everything for me. So I'm going to paint a little bit of a picture of just kind of what the situation is, like where we're at, how we got here. And the gist at the end of the day is just more and more young workers or young prospective workers are thinking about the trades in ways that, generations prior just really didn't. They're considering it because disenchantment around college and getting a degree is just starting to really pick up steam. We're also kind of entering this situation again where pay is better than ever in the trades. There's new technologies that make, many more doors open up in the trades specifically, and also make some of these jobs that previously were heavy manual labor, a little bit more skilled labor jobs. And so I think that people who maybe previously would have just kind of said, no, I'm not interested in this because I don't want to do hard labor. Now there's more opportunities to consider something in the trades that doesn't necessarily require that. So there's also the competing problem of college is expensive and it only continues to become more so. And we talked about this in a recent episode. Degree inflation is a huge problem that's happening in any knowledge field whatsoever right now. There's a lot of people who have degrees, and a lot of them are struggling to find a job, even with degrees of higher education. There's so many people who have master's degrees who are like, what do I do with this now? Now that I've been a career student for the better part of a decade, what comes next? So I think that the younger generation has definitely taken note of this. It's a very observant, a very online generation. There's more information being shared than ever before and more opportunity to consider alternative paths, which I think, when I think back to my experience as, a high schooler, the only path that I saw before me was go to college, get a degree, get a job. I didn't even consider the fact that there were opportunities for me to go into a vocational training program and, start a job right out of high school. So I think that as that disenchantment grows and as our awareness of other paths grow, we're starting to have more and more kids say, okay, well, do I have to drown in debt and claw my way out of this debt hole for, 20 to 30 years just to get a degree that I may or may not end up using anyway? Or is there another path that I can consider right from the start? So before I start getting into some numbers and some interesting things, any thoughts like right off the bat?
Only a quarter page worth of thoughts, but I know we're gonna get into all this. We'll reach into it over time, but there's so many different points I think that like you said, we'll get into it. People used to go to school to get the degree so you could get the six-figure job someday. Well, now it's okay, I'll get the six-figure job someday, but I've also got 6 figures worth of debt. So that's two times plus interest as long to get it back. There's that whole wait. Or I can just go to a trade school and it's now getting paid 6 figures for a lot of these skilled crafts because there's so limited of supply of the people it can go after. So I totally get it from that standpoint. It's so logical that you just look at it, you're like, well, duh, yeah, of course. And the other one that is interesting, so it's starting to come about a little bit more with Gen Z, but it was funny last week. Um, so my wife and I, we have an 11-month-old daughter, and we were like, we really have to get a will in place. We haven't done anything, like heaven forbid we're on the same plane, something happens. And so we go and we're talking to the individual who's helping us with that, and they're just saying, what do you want the plan to be if something were to happen before 18? How do you want the money to be dispersed, or anything is after college degree? And I was like, well, after college degree or some type of skilled trade certification, something else, but something like an advanced education. And so to that point, like, to me, that was a no brainer between the two. But for this individual who was much more of the I don't want to put an age on the person, but they were an older generation than I was. And to them, it was like, and no knock on them, but they were just like, college degree. That's all that they really think about, funny enough. So it's like, yeah, I think it is creeping up more and more. But to that point, I was just like, why should she have to go to college to get this when there are other paths to being successful?
Exactly. And I definitely think that this is one of those, we've talked about this a lot, and I think both of us love this concept. Everything is very cyclical. And, my dad, my mom, they were very blue collar. They didn't have the opportunity to go to college. And so for them, the idea of success and being like raising a successful family was all of our kids are going to college. And so
Hmm.
that was very much impressed upon me and my siblings. But then now when you get to this place of, yeah, our generation starting to have kids, like we are a generation that is riddled with debt from these degrees. And a lot of us have, again, I've said this multiple times. I have a journalism degree. I've never really, if you think about it, used my journalism degree, quote unquote. And so there's this kind of question of, okay, what do we want for our children? What do we want to impress upon them? What would be the takeaways from our experience? And so there is that cyclical nature of everything kind of comes full circle, and especially as things start to shift so much with AI and just different technologies, which we'll get into a little bit more, the conversation becomes a little bit more convoluted and confusing. One thing that you mentioned too is just earning potential, and we will get into this a little bit more, but in the job that I talked about before, the nonprofit job, I was writing a lot of grants for these programs, and one of the biggest clinchers for getting funding for these programs was being able to prove the fact that the earning potential that someone has going into the trades there's a lot of misconceptions around how much you can make in that world versus how much you can when you have a degree. And it's actually crazy the growth potential that someone has within the trades to be able to learn really fast, pick up a skill that's in high demand, and then start their own business, start their own company, become this self-employed person who's making X amount. It's very much, there are paths to that, and I think we're starting to see that happen a lot more. Someone who's a motivated, ambitious individual can make a lot of money in the trades, and it's not just a backup plan for someone who maybe doesn't have as much ambition. And I think that that's how it's previously been positioned is, all right, well, try to go to college. If it doesn't work, you can always fall back on becoming a plumber. That's not the mindset anymore. It's like, hey, I'm an ambitious person. I want to start making money right away, and I want to grow a business that becomes profitable for, X number of employees as well. So I think it's a really interesting conversation because it's shifting the mindset, not just around the trades, but also like how we structure our careers and our, I think the younger generation is starting to have that long-term approach sooner in terms of, okay, where do I want to go with this? Like what's my end game? And so I think it's really interesting to see that they're factoring that into their decision and starting to, consider the trades in that mindset as well. So,
Hmm.
so I'll get into some stats now just to kind of paint a picture of what the situation is right now. Enrollment in vocational focused community colleges and trade schools is at its highest recorded level in the past 2 decades. It surged 16% last year. And specifically, two areas of major growth are HVAC maintenance and car maintenance, which both rose 7% just last year. And then also, construction is as a whole just surging right now. There's a lot of demand for construction jobs and a lot of interest because there's a lot of different paths that you can kind of pursue within that world. So, um, new hires in construction specifically have seen their median annual pay outperform those in professional services and information sectors for 4 straight years now. So this is an interesting situation in which construction specifically, especially considering the different like admin paths that you can take, project management, superintendents, there is a lot of opportunity for you to really, really kind of out earn your peers who are maybe pursuing something in the information sector. So I found that really interesting. And another one that's on the rise and doesn't often get included in the trades conversation because it's kind of in this weird gray area is medical tech in general. Ultrasound technicians, MRI technicians, CAT scan technicians, all of that. There is a growing interest in that field as well. People who are interested in medicine, but maybe don't want to, again, accumulate the debt that comes from going to medical school. This is a really interesting option for them. And again, instant earning potential and a lot of flexibility when it comes to your working hours that you don't necessarily get as a doctor or as a surgeon or some other field in medicine. So, a lot of interesting opportunity in both the construction and car, like more of the typical vocational world, and then also in the medical world as well. So I like the fact that there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of different opportunities to explore and ways that you can kind of make multiple dreams come true by pursuing an alternate path. So the question becomes, is college worth it? What is your gut reaction to that question, Sam?
Ask me 15 years ago, ask me 5 years ago, ask me today. It's
Ask
gone
you in
about.
15 years,
Ask me
Like,
again. Yeah, exactly. It's completely changed over time because yeah, when I got out, I was riddled with that, like you said, and I was just like, I got into work experience. I'm like, well, that accounting 201 class was worthless. Like I've got Google for anything. Like the marketing class is nothing like what I'm actually doing for marketing today. And I remember having a conversation with my wife's grandfather about it, and he was a very economical individual, very logical. We'd always just have good conversations. And I said that to him, and he kind of stopped, and he's just like, I disagree with you. He's like, I think college is absolutely worth it. And I was kind of surprised by that one, to be honest. I was like, all right, like, let's chat, like, hear your thoughts. And his was a lot around the social aspects of it. And he's just like, you can't replace that. Like, have to go out on your own, have to figure it out, learn how to be independent, self sufficient. And there were a number of lessons that I learned that way. And from that side, I do agree. And there were classes that were absolutely valuable. I think it comes back to, though, how do you cost valuate certain things? Because it's like, if I look at a cup and it's $500. I'm like, that cup's not worth $500. To me, that's kind of how some of these educational things are. It's like, well, do you need to go to the $60,000 university, or can you go find other places where you can go and get a good education from while you also are able to get the other experience of like learning how to be a functional individual within society?
Yeah, I think that the social element is a really interesting one, getting the college experience and the potential of like missing out on that, and almost, what is the value on that? I'd be curious to see, studies around like what, from a developmental perspective, from
Hmm.
an independence, and from like a future productivity perspective, what impact does just purely the social side of college hold? I'm curious. I definitely feel like there's a lot of things, like I met my husband at college, like that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone there. There's those soft things that do have an impact. And I feel like, especially after you've been, you definitely appreciate and, respect those things. But it's difficult, yeah, to put a number on that. It's difficult to, I don't know, like look at it in the binary sense of like, yes, it's worth it, or no,
Yeah.
it's not, because there is so much nuance. Some people go to college and have a terrible experience too. So there's a little bit of that where I'm just like, it depends,
Hmm.
so much comes back to it's a very individual experience. Your
Yep.
career is a very individual thing. And like, it's what it comes down to, what's best for each person.
Yeah.
But the question that I have is like, is there a way to kind of foster that college experience in a different way? Like, through a vocational school, through
Hmm.
an apprenticeship, whatever it may be. Like, how do we kind of give people the opportunity to not have to make the sacrifice of, okay, I'm not getting this, fundamental, like growing up, coming of age experience, but I'm getting this instead.
Yeah.
Um,
And there definitely is. I mean, think about colleges and universities and the way that we think about it, where the general public go to it. That's what, 100 years, maybe 150 years in the grand scheme of things. Like apprenticeships, learning trades and skillcraft, that's thousands of years. That's been the norm for like grow up, leave your family, do all that. So it's definitely doable. It's absolutely doable. It's just, yeah, where is that middle ground? What does it look like in today's world?
Exactly. And I think like on some level the social argument almost kind of works in the opposite direction as well. As I think a lot of people go to college and just kind of go for a good time. It's like you're spending all of this money just to have time to hang out with your friends. And so I think that there is the element too of, if you are a really ambitious person who just wants to start producing right away, it's almost an argument in the favor of going into the trades, because you're getting a really strong intergenerational dynamic right off the bat, a mentor, an apprenticeship, whatever it may be, who's really pouring into you and teaching you how to level up very quickly. And then you're also getting the opportunity to start making money that then allows you to travel, or allows you to do things that are also filling you up as an individual and socially, and having these experiences. So I guess it's not like an either or situation, but
Hmm.
rather one in which, okay, the types of experiences that, Gen Z and, younger generations may crave might be a little bit different than the ones that were very formative to our generation and the one that came before. So it's
Hmm.
it's interesting in that side of things too.
Yeah.
So, one thing that I think is really interesting is when you ask Gen Z, even as young as middle schoolers, when you ask them if college is worth it, there's some really interesting responses to surveys that have been conducted. So, Business Insider conducted one in July of 2023. 600 Gen Zers, only 39% of them said that advancing their education is important to them after high school, which is really
Hmm.
interesting. So these are high school students who were asked, like, how highly do you value continuing your education after school? And only 39% of them said that that was something that they valued highly. I found that kind of shocking, honestly. Like, I would have guessed maybe 60%, and that would have even
Hmm.
felt low to me. Again, this is only 600 students, so it's a smaller sample size, but I still think it's a really interesting stat when you think about, this is something that was presented within the context of other options as well, going into the trades, pursuing something else. So there is that context to keep in mind, but it paints a really interesting picture for the future of college in this country specifically. And yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. And then the other point that was kind of brought up in this was the perception of earning potential from a Gen Z perspective. Like, how much more do you think that you could make if you go to college? And it was almost completely neutral. Like, there was no perception anymore of the fact that your earning potential is higher if you go to college than if you don't. And I thought that was really fascinating too, because again, within one generation, that has drastically shifted. Because if you had asked me the same question, 15 years ago, I would have said, oh, definitely, like, my earning potential will be higher if I get a
Mm-hmm.
college degree.
No, colleges have done a really good job of marketing for a long time. Looks like they're slipping up a little bit.
Exactly. One thing that I love this quote. So, Joseph Fuller, he is a professor at Harvard Business School, and he's also one of the co leaders of their Managing the Future of Work initiative. They put out a lot of really interesting work. A lot of the stats that I pull for podcasts and stuff like that come from them directly. Lots of really interesting, cutting edge studies that they've been conducting. One thing that he says is there has been, for the first time in a long time, a narrowing of the gap between what you make as a college graduate and what you make as a non college graduate. And the so called college premium has shrunk drastically. So, this is something that, a very well studied, a very, finger on the pulse individual is calling out. He works for a college and is saying, listen, the college premium is fading fast. And yes, if colleges want to shift that narrative, there's going to have to be a restructuring of how, one, college is positioned, but two, likely the way that it's structured in general, the trainings that people go through, what the classes look like, as well as how much it costs. Like, that's the biggest thing here. So I think the biggest takeaway for me is college can be a great choice. It depends on what your goals are, what your ambitions are, what your timeline looks like. And trades are not a lesser option. They're not a backup plan. They're more so, a competitor to college in terms of which makes the most sense for which individual at which point in time. So that's kind of my takeaway from that piece of things. Any other thoughts on the is college worth it train of thought before we move on?
No, not much else to add to that.
Okay, so one thing that we've seen increasingly, as digging into data and then just colloquially, like this is being talked about all the time, is people go where the money is, but they also go where the stability is. And I think one thing that's really interesting and paints a really compelling picture is the fact that there has been quite an increase in funding going to apprenticeships and entrance into the trades. I mentioned before, I was working at a nonprofit 10 years ago that was working on funding these apprenticeship programs and education around the trade. So this is something that the government has been interested in investing in for quite some time. It's becoming more of a public conversation now. But in February of this year, the Biden-Harris administration announced $200 million in grants would be going towards expanding registered apprenticeships. So this is something that $200 million 2 months ago has been funneled into this specifically. In Massachusetts, we've also seen the administration there announce $5 million to expand apprenticeships within the state. So, on a federal level and also on a state level, we're seeing the government start to push the trades a lot more. There's a lot of, especially when you think about construction, infrastructure implications here. There's a lot of medical. We've talked about this before. Nurses leaving in droves post COVID, and not coming back. Now we're having this need when it comes to our medical system. We have a lot of opportunity, and the government is starting to invest in this very, very fully. And at the same time, college costs continue to increase. And so, again, that balance is kind of shifting in terms of Gen Z going where the money is. If you follow the money, we're investing in trades much more than we're investing in college right now, from a government perspective, at least. And so I think that if we want to continue to encourage students to pursue higher education in the traditional sense, we need to be pacing with how much we're investing currently in the trades and apprenticeships. And that's just simply not happening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot more to add to that one. It's just, yeah, it's like you're seeing the investments happen. Granted, I mean, I look at a number like $200 million from the government, and I still think that's, when I see the figures that are tossed around the news every day, I'm just like, that's pennies to them. You look at a school,
Exactly.
it's what, like $50,000 for a year. What, I'm so bad at mental math, it's not even funny. 50,000 times two
X.
people, 100. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's gonna catch up to that pretty quickly. They're like, oh, okay, that's only like, I don't know, 600 students paying for school at one point. But I think this is
Exactly.
the start of the first domino that's gonna fall
Totally. I
that
think it's
pushes
more
us
of an
further.
optics thing almost
Yeah.
too. It's like, all right, we're making the calculated and concerted effort to invest in the trades, and that's really just the statement that's being made.
Hmm.
The dollar amount, agreed, is nominal at this point, but I think that definitely a statement in terms of like where the priorities are seen from the perspective of the government, from again both a federal and state perspective. Yeah, that $5 million coming from the state of Massachusetts, that goes away very quickly, but that's just government money. This is
Hmm.
also something where my husband works for a construction firm, and they invest a ton of money in equipping younger generations, showing up at schools, doing apprenticeship and trade programs, specifically with the interest of, hey, we have so much work coming through, and we just simply do not have, one, the staff to be able to pull this off, but two, the interest from prospective 5 years from now employees. And so really starting to just like companies themselves taking ownership over equipping the next generation with the knowledge that they need to be able to like step into a role like this, or to have the interest in it. And I think that that's kind of getting ahead of myself, but that's a really cool opportunity for recruiters in general, is like the education component of this, and like
Hmm.
the interest building component. If we've talked about how important niching down can be, this is a really interesting opportunity where if you develop a niche within the construction world specifically, there's so much interesting opportunity to start publishing your own content around the opportunities that there are in construction, and the ways that a prospective student, or a eventual construction admin of some sort could start breaking into that world and could start learning and developing skills that will set them apart. So I think there's a lot of really cool opportunities when we think about like taking ownership over this and starting to paint a picture of like what we want the future to look like, that goes beyond funding and more so like, okay, education and
Hmm.
opportunities. And yeah, I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
So the next piece of that is, people go where the money is, but they also go where the stability is. And I think we can't have this conversation without bringing in the AI of it all, and how much artificial intelligence has just changed the game fundamentally. I think that knowledge workers specifically are feeling the sting and the pain of, what does this look like for us? Like when I think about how I felt about artificial intelligence and robots and machine learning and all of this stuff when I was 20, I would have thought, oh, the jobs that are getting replaced are like the assembly lines and
Hmm.
like the blue collar jobs are going to go away because robots will do that stuff. And the copywriting and this and that will be, coding, that's going to be humans. In reality, like that has obviously not proven to be the case. And so I think that there's a lot of really interesting conversations happening around just like, okay, what careers make sense for me to spend money on investing in and, developing skills in? Is this job going to be here by the time I graduate? And so this is something that when we think of that lack of certainty over the next 5, 10, 15 years, it's really shifting the way that Gen Z thinks about their career, their opportunities. And so every day there are stories about college graduates who have multiple degrees and can't find a job. Every day there are posts on LinkedIn and articles in all of the business journals talking about layoffs, mass layoffs in tech. So I think that all of this stuff is definitely having an impact on the way that Gen Z thinks about the future. And so as they think about that, I think there's this push to understand like what is a stable path, even if it's only for the next 20 years, and then being able to pivot from there. A 2023 survey commissioned by Jobber found that high school and college age respondents said that they thought blue collar jobs offered better job security than white collar ones. And specifically, one of the reasons that they noted was the growth of artificial intelligence. So, really interesting there. They've got their finger on the pulse of this issue and are definitely like using that to, make decisions about their future. And yeah, again, a generation that's been raised by people who have seen all of these changes happen very rapidly and are feeling the instability. I think it makes sense that they are thinking this way.
Yeah, and it's smart too, especially if they're thinking about, well, what are the jobs that I would have for the first 10 years out of college? It usually is going to be more of those easily replaceable by AI in the like the business world. Some of those types of thing. I mean, design, go to Mid Journey. You want to write something up, go to ChatGPT. Not saying that it can fully replace. I'm far from saying anything like that, but I totally get where they're thinking about that. And then I go to the other side. I remember I called a plumber handful of months ago, and they're like, soon as we can get out is about 6 days from now. I'm just like, what?
I need this now.
Yeah, yeah. And so that goes to the point. Well, you're so far from saturation in most cities with a lot of these trades where it's like it's time is money at the end of the day. If you can get more workers, if you want to start a business, like there's plenty to go around. I can more than likely promise you that. So yeah, that opportunity is absolutely there.
Exactly. And I think one thing that's really interesting too about the trades, and I've learned this just through observing conversations that my husband, as a project manager, has had with superintendents, has had with subcontractors in plumbing, electrical, all of that stuff. It is such a highly relational business. There's a lot of it's very referral based, it's very who you know, and it's kind of that word of mouth type of mentality. And so starting sooner and getting really like developing that skill set and starting to develop that network is so key. And I think that if you take the, you know, chronic onlineness of Gen Z and like their savviness when it comes to all things tech and combine that with the relational kind of approach that a lot of these trades have, the future and that world seems so crazy to me, and I'm so excited to see where this goes because I just think it's a total reframe of the ways that we've thought about these vocational jobs before and have really like I don't know, I just think it's going to bring a whole new perspective to it, and I'm really fascinated to see how that pans out because again, this is a generation that just has mastered skills that people used to go to school for 10 years ago. They master them just by existing and now, you know, thinking about that person, yeah, becoming a plumber, becoming an electrician, becoming an HVAC tech, whatever it may be, there's so much opportunity there, that I just think is going to be really, really cool to see how it pans out.
Hmm. All right. We spent a half hour with context teeing this up.
Yes.
Recruiters, this is the moment you've been waiting for. What the
This
heck does
is
this
it.
mean for us?
Yeah. So I think that one of the biggest things that I want to start off by saying is just these numbers are trending upward in terms of interest, in terms of demand, all of this. But I think that there are some natural, like recruiters listening to this might be like, okay, this changes everything fundamentally. Like all of the places I search for talent, all of the ways that I do my job, like this is just a totally different ballgame if you're not already like deeply steeped into the world of trades. And so I think that again, this causes and has some implications when it comes to how we're, you know, how we are doing our jobs. One thing that like contextually I think this is really key, the US has stated that there is a shortage of almost 700,000 skilled tradespeople, which has caused this major backlog in construction. 80% of construction companies say that they need help recruiting. Great opportunity. Ding, ding, ding. Um, and in the past 6 years, many of these construction companies have cited hiring as their number one business challenge. So I think that that is, I mean, an amazing value prop for a recruiter to be able to come in and say, listen, I can help solve your number one business problem, which is people. Um, to help fill these vacancies, I think this is a really interesting piece of the puzzle, too. A lot of companies are focusing on trying to recruit more women. This is a career, a field, construction specifically, that's been previously dominated by men. And I think that there's been a lot of really interesting, there's been a push to get more women interested in construction. And there's been more, again, of a need for education around that area specifically. I think that this is a really cool opportunity for a recruiter to come in and say, listen, I'm going to niche down and focus on getting women into construction jobs and like publishing a ton of educational content around that, around the challenges women face in the field and around some solutions and opportunities. So much cool stuff that like my mind spins with there. Um, but I think that again, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's some challenges, and a lot of them come down to that education piece of the puzzle. And I think that there's also the challenge of there's some urgent need right now. And this is an issue that, again, is only going to continue to grow. So while this is a challenge, I also think it's a really, really good opportunity for some recruiters to just like jump in on this while while tech is spiraling, there's a whole other door that's been wide open, but that a lot of people haven't really looked into. And I think that there's, yeah, so much opportunity there. So,
Yeah. I mean, we talk about what skills based hiring. Look at all those people who've been laid off in tech, project managers. I bet this would translate really well over to other industries like construction, others, or even I remember when I first got my start in tech, at the end of the day, I was just like, I just want to like do something with my hands. I want to have something tangible. And I used to just build all this furniture for this type of reason. Like there's a bunch of people out there that just because you've worked in one industry for so long doesn't mean that you're constrained to that for the rest of your life. You can absolutely make the switch over to another place. So as a recruiter, even if you find someone who, has the open to work badge, or of someone who was laid off, talk to them about these other industries and you can help educate them. Talk to them about these opportunities. Well, I have to provide my family. It's like, do you know how much you can make doing this? Because it might be a lot more than you think, and it's actually going to provide a comparable, if not higher, standard of living than you were currently making before. So I think that's a huge opportunity, like you said.
For sure. And I think that, you raise a really interesting point around like skills based hiring there. One thing like that, comes up a lot in this world is okay, a college degree might not be required, but a lot of times there's some kind of certification and experience or whatever it may be. And so I think that one of the challenges that we have here, if we're really trying to make a hiring push in this world, is okay, what are the opportunities for training someone up once they're hired, hiring someone and training them based off of just like the potential that this candidate holds, and then also just what are those certifications that are required for each of these different jobs. Like obviously that's something that the recruiter themselves will have to be very clued into and just in the know around. We see this happen a lot already with healthcare, but this is something that, again, from a finding candidates perspective, you mentioned thinking creatively. But the issue that a lot of times we see in vocational work is a lot of these employees or like candidates are not on LinkedIn, which is one of the, live and die places that a recruiter will spend their time. And so I think that niching down here becomes key again, because it's about understanding where your audience is, where they show up, where someone who fits into the demographic of who you're looking to fill these roles with. And so I think, trade shows, conferences, hiring events, these are all really key, but then also understanding specialized job boards for these fields, really being able to dig into that. And then also outreach, understanding when to reach out, how to reach out. We've talked about this before, healthcare workers. Are they sitting at a computer all day, checking their email, refreshing nonstop? No. So maybe it makes more sense to send them a text or call them at 5 p.m., when they're on their drive home or whatever it may be. So having a little bit more of that strategic approach of, okay, all of the best practices that you maybe have adopted over the course of your career might need to shift a little bit if you do start to niche down and like specialize in a trade specifically. So I think that that is definitely one of the biggest challenges. I think the biggest challenge, and I think this one is really fascinating, is obviously remote work has become such a huge conversation, and the trades are not known for flexibility. I think that Gen Z values flexibility very highly. Millennials do as well. This has been proven in study after study after study. So I think that flexibility and pay being two of the biggest issues, the trades have to compromise a little bit here in terms of how flexible they're willing to be. Obviously, remote work is not going to really make sense in a lot of these jobs, but offering opportunities for, flexible paid time off, transparent scheduling, this is a huge thing, split shifts, more leniency with breaks. There are ways that we can kind of create flexibility and offer that as a perk, and kind of, again, reframe what the trades look like so that they become a little bit more appealing to candidates who may not have considered them otherwise. And so I think that if there is high demand, which we know that there is for trade workers, we need to think about what is valuable to the job market as a whole, to candidates as a whole. And we have seen in the modern era, flexibility and pay are the two top things there. So
Hmm.
how can we compromise and meet them where they're at in that regard is a big challenge.
Yeah. So one thing you said earlier has me feeling optimistic about a certain part of this. So you said, the upcoming generations are very tech savvy, right? Go and look at most of the, like, plumber comes out, electrician comes out, HVAC person comes out, they come and check out the unit. Oh, this is broken, I'm gonna have to order this part, this and that. Well, there's now tech that I'm seeing some organizations start to adopt, and instead of sending someone out to basically do it, they're just like, it's the equivalent of FaceTime on your phone, an app they use, and they're like, go walk me over to your HVAC unit, pop off these 4 screws, let me take a look. Oh, okay, I can see what it is. And so I bet you'll have a combination of people who are just going to be straight up, like, I'll call them FaceTime agents, more or less, where they can do that remotely if they would prefer
Yeah.
to, and they can diagnose it from that regard, send out people to it. But that's just one example of many where I fully see the opportunity, and I know organizations already are taking advantage of this, where they can apply tech to some of these existing trades to be smarter with how they work.
100%. And I think that that is an opportunity here too for, again, reframing a little bit and kind of educating the trades are known for being very old school. And so I think
Hmm.
that there's a lot of room for these, stereotypically slow adopter type companies to start to get with the picture a little bit when it comes to digitizing where it makes sense, moving in different directions, and being open to, changing things up a little bit in order to become more efficient, one, but also to become more appealing to the next generation of talent. And I think that that comes from the way that you do your job in general, but then it also comes to the way that you're, hiring. And so I think that making your hiring process more people centric makes it faster, makes it a lot more effective in general. And I think especially for, we've talked about this when it comes to writing job descriptions for Gen Z, making sure that you have this mentality around making sure that people are going to absorb the information that you're putting in front of them, making sure that it's relatable to them and that it matches the speed and velocity in which they're able to consume information in other areas as well is so critical. And I think that that's an area where the trades have previously struggled a lot, and this is a great opportunity for recruiters, is just coming in and kind of optimizing the hiring process specifically. One thing that I find really interesting, and this makes sense, I was poking around on Reddit and just reading stories about recruiters who are hiring in the skilled trades, and one of the biggest challenges and opportunities is how quickly the hiring process happens in that world. You're used to, in the tech world, interview periods that last upwards of a month. You've got 10 different interviews with different, involved parties. You've got a ton of candidates that you're interviewing. This comment, I think, is really fascinating and is a cool opportunity, again, for a reframe in terms of how recruiters think about this. The commenter says, the thing about skilled trades and engineering that makes it different from other verticals is that it moves very quickly. It is super common for me to find a candidate, submit them to a job, interview, get an offer, and go through notice within a 1 week time frame, which is crazy. I try to submit 2 fully vetted candidates every day and average about 1 placement per week. Placements obviously are smaller. You're going for a series of base hits and not big homers. I charge 20 to 25% of salary depending on volume. Pay rates for candidates can range from 20 per hour to up to 40 plus, and 12 to 15,000 fees are the norm. You try to string together a series of those every month, and that's how this recruiter, makes their income. So it's really interesting. This is very different, a different model from probably how a lot of recruiters who are listening to this might operate. But there's a lot of opportunity there. It's very fast paced, smaller wins that you accumulate over the course of a month. Are you doing the math right now?
I'm doing the math right now
It's like,
because they
this man
make it
has a
sound like
calculator up.
this is small, but okay. So $12,000 fee,
Yep.
one placement a week. That's right there, $624,000.
Yeah.
That's not small change. 15,000 times 52 week, $780,000. I mean, even if you want to take vacation for you're not working every week, I mean, you're still seeing your half mil plus for, again, you don't have to go for the big, I want to hire one CFO, two CFOs a year and get my payday. Like there is a very smart science to just, to continue with the baseball analogy, just keep hitting singles over and over again. And if you've got a good
Rack
process in
them up.
place, it's not that hard. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the biggest takeaway here is a model like this works when you have a really streamlined process.
Hmm.
Again, subtle plug for luck. So we got to fit one of these in every single episode. But this is where having an efficient process where you can move people through the funnel really quickly is so key. Because then at this point, yes, your hiring velocity can be so, so, so high because you're bringing someone through and making a placement once a week. Yeah, you have the ability and the flexibility to take some time off, chill out for a little bit, especially toward the end of the year if you've hit your goal, by having this strategy. So I think that is, reading this comment was mind blowing to me. This is just one of many comments that I read on Reddit that were in the same vein. And were really encouraging to me as I started thinking through, like, what does the future look like for recruiters in this world? I think, again, there's been a lot of really negative messaging happening on LinkedIn specifically around the future of work and all of these things that feel really heavy. And through the research that I did for this podcast, it actually made me much more hopeful around the idea that LinkedIn can be an echo chamber sometimes. And there's a lot of opportunity that exists in previously untapped markets or markets that are just not as hot and trendy. And I think that if we're shifting our focus a little bit, there's actually a lot more hope and opportunity than we maybe really see at face value. So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I'll say here is just there's a lot of opportunity, but one thing with that timeline in mind is just hiring in the trades requires a lot of proactivity. And I think that right now we're in kind of this reactive mode because there's a lot of need. Again, 80% of construction companies say that they're understaffed and have urgent hiring needs. This is something where the impacts on production have such a major ripple effect. And so I think that the idea around recruiting only when you have a need or only when you have, like a skill or a big project that you need labor for immediately, that mentality has got to kind of go the way of the dinosaurs. And again, we pitch this all the time at Loxo, but having that kind of like long-term game mentality when it comes to hiring. Okay, we've got these needs now, but what are our needs in 6 months, a year, 2 years? And how can I build a pipeline that is sustainable over the course of that period of time and build relationships with people who I can keep in mind for these opportunities down the line, not just the ones that are right in front of me. This is something that makes sense for recruiting in any market, but I think in the trades specifically, having that backlog and having that pipeline is critical, especially given how cyclical this world is. So that's my biggest takeaway from this whole conversation is just there's a lot of opportunity, but it requires one, really understanding the market, understanding the specifics of the trade that you do choose to niche down into, but then also being able to be proactive and having that long-term mentality around building relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's especially for those in struggling markets, tech, other ones. I know people have been saying, "Well, I'm actually going to switch back from retained over to contention hiring or contingent, sorry." And just these other things where it's more work and not guaranteed money, or lower rate than you used to make. Like, might be tough for a couple months to go and learn the new market, but the upside of it is it's basically like you and I talk about this all the time with like marketing, other things. Like, what happens if we stay the course? What's this going to look like 6, 12, 24 months from now? Well, I'm probably going to be struggling at the same exact rate, or you know, what's the analogy? Eat the frog early in the morning, so to speak.
Yep.
If you eat the frog early for a couple months, what's that look like 6, 12, 24 months from now? If you do go and switch, you'll catch back up probably 2 months after that first 2 month period. So yeah, that's where zoom out for a second, just think about what's the upside, what's the downside, and map out your paths. And I think that this definitely makes a compelling case if you're especially in one of those struggling industries, niches, anything like that.
100%. And, we've said Gen Z is following the money and following the stability. I'd say the same thing to recruiters who are looking to make a change or, those who are looking to get into recruitment in general. Like, there's a lot of opportunity here. If you do follow the money and follow the stability, there's some doors that are probably already open that you could just walk right through. And I think that they might not have been ones that you had considered previously. But again, we've proven the fact that there's a lot of opportunity to make some pretty good money if you are willing to sit in that discomfort for a little while and yeah, maybe take some losses in the short term or, reduce the amount that you're making on one placement, but make way more placements over the course of a year and accumulate, over time. That makes a big difference. So again, lots of opportunity here and I find it really really fascinating. I'm so curious. I want to touch back on this topic in a year and see how much things have changed because I see this happening very very rapidly. Even just in doing research for this, there's articles being put out every single day on this topic. Wall Street Journal just published their deep dive on this, profiling a bunch of Gen Z workers who have joined the trades and are loving it and are loving the opportunities that they have to maximize their earning potential, maximize their flexibility, and just, yeah, build a really good life that goes beyond work. So I'm excited about this one. And I think it's really, really interesting. I hope
Yeah.
recruiters are excited too.
I think they will be after this, and I think that's a perfect spot to wrap this episode up. So yeah, excited to hear, as you said, stories from anyone who's done this recently or thinking about doing it. Let us know. All right. Well, as everyone knows, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you really like this episode, but you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar one in the show notes, which you can find in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform. Everything's available on our website, loxo.co/podcast. We're up on YouTube. And if you have questions, send them to us, podcast@loxo.co. All right, everyone. That was yet another fun Trending Topics episode with Lex. Until next time, bye, y'all.